capture it. So go ahead and put your name in the chat line if you're online. Those are here. I'll just, I'll put your name in the chat line for you. So, okay. So let's see. Now, so Johnny's not an agent yet. I know Barbara's not one. She works for agents and wants to understand it. And I mean, in Maryland and DC. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not DC.
Okay, but Maryland. Okay.
I'm not a Maryland agent.
Are you DC?
Randy is.
Randy is.
It's my
Okay.
job to get- if I'm gonna add something.
Okay. So, so for me, it's like, you know, knowing if you're actually working or not in those areas, or you're just doing this to learn about it. What I'm going to teach about the contracts will not help you pass the test. I'm telling you. Maryland especially is
Great.
a lot about water rights. So know your water rights in Maryland. But yeah, so the difference between them, you know, those who are doing Virginia contracts, you'll see the difference.
Considerable.
Okay. Yes. All right. So let me go out and share my screen. Now, we've been having some challenges with this showing up. So can you guys, someone let me know, thumbs up that you guys see where it says buyer's consultation? Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. So one of the things I love about Maryland, DC is that they do have some neat checklists. So it tells you what you need for each, you know, department and what each area needs. So starting off today, we're going to be looking at pages 27 and page 5. So page 5 is the one I'm on now, which is the buyer's consultation for DC, and page 27 is the one from Maryland. And I'm using the Montgomery County one because that's the closest in one that we more likely cross over the border to do. When you get into PG County, Howard County, and some of the other counties, they have some of their own documents that they want you to use. Right now, we're going to be teaching through the GCAR documents. MAR has its own set of documents that the other counties use. So as you're working with agents across the border into Maryland, and if they're not in Montgomery County, ask them which contract they want you to use if you're representing a buyer, okay? If you're representing a seller, you know, check around to see predominantly what contract they use. So some in PG County have used the GCAR and some use the MAR. So, you know, depends on closer you are to the Beltway, they seem to use more of the GCAR. And it's, you know, the comfortable level for different people. So, but one of the things I find, I've written a lot of Maryland and DC contracts over the last nearly 20 years. For those who don't know me, I was part of the group that came here, started Keller Williams Falls Church, but we were with another company before that. So I also worked as a transaction coordinator for many years, not only as the office manager, but for agents in that office. So my expertise in writing offers, before I even became an agent myself, and working for other agents, was, you know, writing them and learning them basically on my own during the heyday of the market before the crash in the early 2000s. So what I find, and what I continue to find, as I've stated before in the Virginia Boot Camp, is that while setting up the KW office here in 2013, 2014, and talking to the attorneys at the different boards was that I said, off the top of my head one time, I said, probably 75% of the agents have never read the contract. And they laughed. First, it was at MBAR. And she said to me, she goes, oh, it's probably closer to 90, even 95%. And I was just thrown back. I said, I thought 75% was bad enough. And then GCAR pretty much said the same thing. And they said, the reason we can tell is because the questions we get can all be answered if they just read the verbiage in the contract. So that was the, how the boot camp got started. It was born out of that desire to, as we were onboarding agents in the early days, I could no longer work one-on-one like I used to do with, say, Drew Swirsky or Steve McIlvain, where I would teach them kind of one-on-one and walk them through what I do in boot camp, but I did it individually. So that's how we came up with doing it broad scope. And things like this very first document here, understanding who real estate agents represent. I would get this all the time. Now, Maryland contracts are long enough as it is. So you've got a listing agent and a buyer's agent, and they send me this document. And right here, it clearly states required when you don't have a signed agreement with your client, also required when the other side doesn't have a signed agreement. So I'm like, why are you sending me this document? Why are you adding more paperwork to what we already have to do? So that was always a puzzlement to me. It's like, it's pretty clear when you use this document, but they're not reading this. Someone has taught them to just throw it in there, okay? Recently, I have been involved in doing some compliance and watching some deals for people and helping some other agents out. And in the last 10 days, I have received 2 Maryland offers where one, the client I was helping out represented the seller. The buyer's agent on the other side sent us their buyer's agreement, all their internal documentation. I mean, when we got the offer, it was 70 some pages long. And I'm just like, what? You know, and having to go through and cull through and cut all that out. It's because the agent, you know, really was not sure what they were doing. They were sending more than they needed to. So sending more doesn't necessarily mean better. So I caution you, and that's why I like these forms. Now, I don't know that these are in command. I've got to, you know, be truthful here. A lot of us who do Maryland and DC, we're still converting over to command. And a lot of our stuff is still in zip forms. So this is out of my zip form package, okay? And if you know for sure that it's in command, and Shannon may have put it there, if not, maybe we can see about it getting in there. But I find it a really handy tool. So when I'm writing an offer for somebody, or even representing or helping someone with a listing, I pull this out and I make sure what documents are required based on the situation, okay? So if you're the listing agent and a buyer walks in that's not represented, okay, this is one of the forms you would have to use for them, okay? There's many others you would have to use. The best thing would be, because, you know, dual agency, we prefer that you not do that, would be to refer it out to another agent, okay? But with that said, I'm not going to go over that document. That's something you guys can look at for yourself. Continuing on down on consent for dual agency, this is DC is required, and it's also required in the Montgomery County or Maryland, okay? So, and then the buyer's agency, okay? And then the notification of dual agency within a team in Maryland. So, for example, if Ann here and Randy, if they were both Maryland agents, they're on a team, then they have to, and one's going to represent the buyer, one's going to represent the seller, then they have to do the notification dual agency within the team. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Consent for dual agency, when you say it's required, it's only required if we're talking dual agency.
Correct. Correct. It's only required, and that's a great point, Ann. Ann was asking, when is it required? It's required if an agent is a member of a team. So Now, in my situation, my team partner is only Virginia, and I'm Maryland and DC. When I'm representing someone in Maryland, she will never be representing anyone in Maryland. So there is no requirement for dual agency. I never have to fill that form out because she's not representing the other side. It's only if an agent on a team, so like Ann and Randy, if both of them were Maryland agents and one was a listing agent and one represented the buyer, they have to notify the buyer and seller that they work on the same team. They're both fiduciarily gaining money from the contract, and it's dual agency within the team. Ann can be representing the buyer, Randy can be representing the seller, but they work on a team. Other than that, dual agency is not permitted in Maryland, okay? So dual agency is not permitted in Maryland. It's only permitted in a team situation, but you have to disclose it. Now,
So that second bullet on page 27 doesn't really apply. So,
right, it's not permitted in Maryland unless it's on a team, exactly.
all right.
Right. So Ann's comment was on page 27. It says consent for dual agency required if representing the buyer. Okay. But again, dual agency is not required and is not permitted in Maryland. It's only required on the team. So if you have a situation where you're going to be representing a buyer and you have listings and you're a team member on a team, see, some teams can have 20 or 30 members on them, you know, and that's why it's important. So if there's a chance that you're on an expansion team or some team that you might be showing a property of someone on that team, then you would want to make sure that your buyer that you're representing knows up front that you could possibly be showing them property where a team member could be the listing agent, right? So that's why it's there. Because at some point, the documents will ask you, were you a team member? Did you know ahead of time if that you were dual agency or did you just meet somebody? So, okay. Now, another thing, the other thing I often get, which just boggles my mind, is because someone has gone down here, all they do is they see the word required and they don't read the rest of the sentence, or the fact that they see dual agency and they don't understand what dual agency means. So let's say you're a RE/MAX agent, Sampson, Compass, EXP, whatever, okay, and you're writing an offer to another brokerage. You should not be sending them consent for dual agency, notification of dual agency within the team, understanding who represents real estate. None of those documents should accompany your offer. But they do it anyway. It's because of lack of training, okay? So as Sheila was saying on the morning coffee, you know, we want you to write good offers. We want you to communicate with the other side and writing offers that is going to get attention, okay? And one of the other offers I had recently, I was working with an agent in Fredericksburg, Virginia offer. The agent, who was a family member of the person buying, only filled out what they thought was a pertinent information on the offer, but it didn't include the fact that they were marking down that they were a family member to the purchaser. They didn't mark down where the EMD was going to be deposited. I mean, it was so limited, you know. The agent sent me a copy and said, what do I need to do with this? And I said, send it back. Tell them to fix it. And the agent on the other side thought that she was not, had the right to do that. And I said, oh, you have the right to do that. You don't have to present an offer that's not acceptable because you don't want to have to go through and enter in all that information, have your client initial it, and then send it back to the other people to initial. It's not, you're not required to do that. You're not required to be a kindergarten teacher correcting someone's paperwork, okay? So now the buyer's agreement here, okay, required. Now, even in You know, in Virginia, the buyer's agreement hasn't been required for that many years. Now, our office has required it far longer than Virginia did, but Maryland and DC have required it for a long time. Okay, you need to have a requirement to represent somebody. Okay, and then as you go down through here, these are sheets that you can provide, but they're not required. Okay. But if you want to understand about the buyer's settlement estimate, settlement costs and use that, feel free to do that. Protecting your home against lead. Now that is required, right? When it's a pre-1978 house. If you're representing a buyer who's looking in areas where most of the houses could be pre-1978, you know, go ahead and give them a copy of this during your buyer's agreement time. Same with Virginia. I mean, in Maryland, DC, overall. And then after you've got your buyer stuff, then it walks you into what you're going to need as to write a contract. So we'll get to that in a little bit. That'll probably be next Monday. Today, we're predominantly going to be working through buyer stuff and touch a little bit on listing. Okay, now I've got to move all your beautiful faces out of my way there. Because and I can never seem to do it. Okay, I just want to bounce back. All right, let's try that. Okay. All right, so so this agreement is for the, and it states for Maryland and DC. Like I said, predominantly, this is a GCAR document, and it's mostly used in the Montgomery County area, but again, other areas may use it, especially agents who are right on the border and they're affiliated with GCAR. So if you're on the buyer side, always ask the listing agent what contract, you know, they want you to use. It's better to ask in advance or they would reject and say you need to use the correct one. Okay. And I've personally reached out to like an Anne Arundel agent or a Howard County agent when they have, when there's particular jurisdictional documents that those areas have, and they may not be in my portal. I've had the other agents send those to me so that we can fill them out and add them to the package. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you know, that's up to you. All right, so so I'm going to kind of do this like I do with regular boot camp, which is new agents. So most of you are agents or newer, but your agreement is made between the buyer and the broker. Depending on which office you are with right now, it's Keller Williams Realty Falls Church, Keller Williams Realty Kingstown. We're going to be Keller Williams United. But right now, you know, it's the broker. It's not Steve Gaskins. It's not Shannon. It really is the brokerage, you know, the misspelling. The broker means the brokerage here. And then it says which assigns. Now this is where you get memorialized, whereas in Virginia, it's not until the end that you get mentioned. So then your name is mentioned here, okay? Page, we're on the buyer's agency, page 7, okay, very top of the page. So, huh?
That page 7 of what? What's it in your book?
7.
Oh, 7.
Yeah, page 7 in the book.
Sorry.
Okay. If my numbering is correct, I was having some internet issues over the weekend. So anyway, so which assigns, so the broker is assigning you as the agent of the brokerage in consideration of the service provided. The broker is hereby granted the right to represent the buyer in the purchase, option, or exchange of real property or cooperative units of the property. Now, just like Virginia, Maryland, DC, all the same, the broker is the one in agreement with the buyer. So if something happens to you, whether it's a disagreement between the buyer and you, or maybe you've gotten sick, the broker can then assign it to somebody else. This document in all 3 jurisdictions gives them the right to do that. So sometimes it could be where the buyer, the seller is having an issue with you as their agent for whatever reason. It does happen. Misunderstandings happen. Hurt feelings can happen. So instead of the brokerage terminating the deal and losing, they can put it over to another agent, okay? And more than likely, you would get referral compensation or some sort of compensation, but just know it's the broker who has the right to do that, okay? So the purpose, this agreement establishes a brokerage relationship, an agency relationship between the buyer and broker, and a contractual obligation meaning between the buyer and the broker, in which the broker has exclusive right to represent the buyer under the terms and conditions set forth. So before you have a buyer sign this agreement, you ask them, always ask, do you have a written agreement with any other agent? And if they hesitate in any way, shape, or form, you need to do a little probing and make sure that they really do not. They can say, well, I've been talking to another agent. Okay, great. But do you have a written agreement with another agent? So make sure, because exclusive means that the buyer has an agreement with one broker, not multiple brokers, okay? Broker responsibility. Agent and broker agree to use professional knowledge and skills to locate and present real property, which is available for purchase and suitable for the buyer's needs. Assist buyer through the process of property acquisition. Represent the interests of the buyer in all negotiations and transactions regarding the acquisition of real property, notwithstanding the fact agent may receive compensation from other parties. Now, the fact that it says suitable for the buyer's needs. So if the buyer's lender says they can afford up to $500,000 and the buyer wants to go see something that's priced at $550,000, it's not your responsibility to show it to them because they cannot afford it. Now, if it was a buyer's market, that's different, okay? But just because they want to be a looky-loo, remember your time is your money. So as you're explaining these paragraphs to your buyer, you know, you don't necessarily read it to your buyer. You should provide your buyer, you know, with a copy as best as, if you're setting up a meeting with the buyer, before you meet with them, if you could send them a sample copy of what you're gonna discuss with them and have them sign, or in this time with COVID, let them review it ahead of time and do their own reading. It does help because you are obligated to make sure that they understand the gist of what they're signing, that they're not just blindly signing. And same goes with the contract too. Years ago, I was a paralegal in California, and we had a client come in to sign his estate documents. And the attorney looked at him and said, have you read them? He goes, I glanced through them. The attorney stood up, looked at me and says, Deb, we're going to go to lunch for 2 hours. And just looked at the client and said, we'll see you in 2 hours. And we walked out the door and we left the building and left him sitting there because the attorney could not in good faith, and nor could I, notarize something that he had not read through. Okay, so that's the same thing here. We have a duty to make sure our client does understand what they are signing. And if they understand that, there's less likely to be confusion later on when something does go wrong, because you can clearly go back to that, okay? So buyer's responsibility, buyer will work exclusively with the broker during the term of the agreement and will contact agent first with any questions or showing requests about properties, and not the seller or any other agent. Now, I read this paragraph to my client. At open houses, buyer agrees to notify the party representing the seller of this agreement for new home builders and new home open houses. Buyer agrees to make any first visit to any new home builder's model only while accompanied by the agent. Buyer will furnish broker with the necessary financial and personal information to reasonably establish buyer's ability to purchase property, and authorizes the release of such information to the seller and seller's broker. So Drew Swirsky does a great thing with this when he's teaching the buyer's consultation, is he calls it like get out of jail free card. You know, you give your client a little Ziploc bag or a little envelope or whatever with some of your cards in there. So when they are going to open houses, they just say, this is my agent. If you have any questions, you can contact them. Same with open houses. And I always ask my clients, are you going to be at all interested in open houses? Well, no, I haven't really given it a thought. New houses rather. I said, well, just in case, this is a protocol you need to follow. You really need to make sure that I'm there with you when you're going to a new home's construction. And so what happens is they're going out to lunch one day, and they pass a new home's construction that they never knew was going up there, and they pull in. So I explain to them, and I give them a little story up as I'm going through this with them, and say, when you pull into that new home's construction area, okay, remember, I still represent you exclusively, but they need to pay me my commission. So they need to know that you're working with me. And so if you're going to meet them right up front, you say to them, can I ask you questions? I have an agent. Is it permitted that I tell you who my agent is and fill out any paperwork and ask you questions now, or do you need my agent here with me? Okay. So get that clear up front. Every new homes construction group is different. I've had 2 clients in the last 6 months who bought new construction. One walked into a property and they registered me down. They sent me an email right away. I confirmed that they were my client, and they showed my client some of the models. Then when we had the time to go down to do the actual contract, I was absolutely there. Another property would not let my client look at anything until I was present. So then we had to contact me, and I had to go and be with them. So, but I have that conversation with the buyers because I want my commission. I don't want the new construction to block me from getting my commission, okay? As if I didn't do my job, okay? So I always read the buyer's responsibility to my client. That's about the only paragraph I really read in full, word for word. I want them to understand what their responsibilities are, okay? And I go over what my responsibilities are. Now in Virginia contract, I have it more memorized than I do in the Maryland and DC. I've written more contracts and listing and buyer's agreements for other people over the years than I've actually done for myself in Maryland and DC, okay, for full disclosure. Okay, so there's bugs in this room somewhere. I've been bit like 3 times. Yeah, there's some type of bug in here. I keep getting bit. So I guess the room's been set empty for so long. All right, broker compensation commission. Buyer agrees that the broker shall receive broker's commission of, okay, we would all love to get 3%, but as we know in the market right now, we're not getting 3%. So about a year or so ago, Steve and Shannon made a decision, and I teach this in boot camp for Virginia, that we put in here 3%. Now on the Virginia compensation package, it states that if there's any extra commission offered, then it goes to the agent. But I'm going to read through this. I don't think the Maryland one says this, but just bear with me and then we'll come back here. Okay, so it's a percentage or a flat fee in Maryland, okay, in DC, at the settlement of any property contracted to be purchased during the term of this agreement, no matter who locates the property. So again, if the buyer locates it without you sending them a listing, then you still get compensated. Even if located entirely by the buyer, in most cases, the seller pays commission. Brokers authorized to receive all commission offered, and such payments shall be made with the sellers and buyers prior to knowledge. So Maryland just worded it differently, but it is all commission. So back up to the first sentence. What Steve and Shannon have determined for us to do is to put in 2% there. Because we don't normally see less than 2% on an offer, but if anything comes in above that, because it says in Virginia, the Virginia Buyers Agreement, and here in Maryland, we're authorized to receive all compensation. Because now, if you're an agent who wants to put in 3%, it's your right to do that. and let's say the listing agent offers 2%, then you are basically telling the buyer they have to pay that extra percent, okay? Now, not only is it the buyer has to agree to it, the lender has to agree to it. So that's where you want to be careful. So to make things cleaner and neater, that's why the agreement of 2% came about. Before, we used to say stuff like 3% plus or minus what's offered in MLS, but there was some conflicts that ran into that with that language, and some challenges that took place. So because both the agreements say that you're allowed to keep all the commission offered, then 2% was a safe bet. Now, mind you, we've seen some Redfin listings coming out with 1.5%. So, just need to be careful with that. If you do have a client and you do end up showing a property that's only offering 1.5% and your client cannot or will not pay the difference, then you would just need to amend your agreement with the buyer that the commission has then changed to the 1.5%. Okay, so as brokers authorized to receive all the commissions offered, and such payment shall be made with the sellers and buyers' prior knowledge. Okay, so that's the agreements. In the event seller does not pay the total commission due, buyer agrees to pay the difference due to the buyer's broker up to the full amount. So if you were to put in 3%, you have to make sure the buyer understands that the buyer also agrees to pay the additional compensation in the amount of. So what this is if your business plan is to charge a flat commission, Keller Williams, United, our 3 offices, Steve Gaskins, does not require you to charge a flat commission. Like other brokerages make it a requirement that their agents charge a flat commission of, say, like $4.95, okay? We don't require that here. If you choose to do it, and there are agents in our office that choose to do that, and everyone has a different amount that they charge as the flat commission. I encourage you to make a business sheet up for yourself that states that you're going to charge a flat commission of, let's say, $4.95, and it's across the board for everybody. Now, if you're former military, and you might say in your business plan that you're not going to charge a flat commission for veterans, then you can say that in your business plan. So if someone were to audit your files, they would see that 5 people were charged a flat commission, but this one wasn't. But this one was a veteran, but the other 5 were not. Therefore, there's no bias in any way except the fact that you're not going to charge a veteran the flat commission, okay? But if your business plan does not have a flat commission in there, then you can simply put 0 there, okay? But don't change it just willy-nilly. If you're going to make a change to your business plan, choose, your anniversary month or something to change your business plan, and just be consistent about it. So if you're going to give yourself a raise, let's say on July 1st, and everyone goes up to $5.95 instead of $4.95, then that's when you raise it up. So someone doing an audit on you can follow that paper trail. Okay, regardless of the seller's payment of commission, buyer has paid in advance fee of blank to retain the services of the broker, which will be credited against the commission due. Now, most of us do not do this and collect a retainer fee. The option's always there to do it. Again, it's your business plan. Most of us do not do that. And if you're doing it because you don't have the funds to show property, or I just find that a very awkward one. Having been a paralegal, when I think of retainer fee, I think of someone hiring an attorney for a long-term trial, and they're giving us money up front to serve them, okay? Because we're not getting commission in the end. But it's built in all the contracts, Maryland, Virginia, and DC, that you can accept a retainer fee. And here in Maryland, it's saying it will be credited to the commission due, where in Virginia, it gives you the option to credit it or not credit it, okay? But again, if you're going to do it, it's your business plan. Just across the board, keep it straight for everybody. Okay, protection period. Commission shall be paid to broker if the property is purchased by buyer within blank days. I think 30 days is more than adequate, but again, it's your business because they can terminate, okay? So that's where you want to, think about that, not having the longevity, but commission shall be paid to broker if the property is purchased by the buyer within 30 days after the termination of this agreement, the protection period, unless the buyer enters into a new valid buyer's agreement during the term of this protection agreement. So if your agreement is terminated, then if you put 60 days in there, the buyer can terminate you. So it's pointless. Okay. Okay. So the amount of commission offered, commission paid by the seller is generally indicated as follows: in Bright MLS for any properties using the MLS, or in an addendum to the purchase contract for new home construction or properties unlisted in the Bright MLS. So that would be for like a for sale by owner. So if you have a client who finds a for sale by owner, just like with the new property construction, they should not go meet that seller on their own. They should engage you to talk to the seller and to negotiate a commission from that seller, get it in writing as to what that commission is going to be. In some jurisdictions, there's paperwork that you fill out, and sometimes it's just a simple agreement that you write out that the seller's going to pay X amount of dollars, X amount of percent on the commission, or a flat fee commission if the property goes to settlement, period. Very simple language. It doesn't have to be complicated. Payment of commission. Commission is due at settlement unless buyer, after sales contract acceptance, fails to perform or is otherwise in default of the sales contract, or executes a release to which the broker is not a party of the sales contract after all contingencies thereunder have been removed. In such case, the commission is due no later than the previously agreed upon settlement date. If buyer enters into a contract with the seller during the original term of this contract and the seller subsequently defaults, then the original term of this agreement is extended by the number of days that the property was under contract. So let's read that one again. Commissions due at settlement, comma, unless buyer has, after sales contract's acceptance, fails to perform or is otherwise in default of the sales contract, or executes a release to which the broker is not a party of the sales contract after all contingencies thereunder have been removed. Right? So once it's been released or fails to, then the commission is no longer there. In such case, the commission is due no later than the previously agreed upon settlement. Okay, if the buyer enters into the contract with the seller during the original terms of this agreement and the seller subsequently defaults, then the original terms of this agreement is extended by the number of days property was under contract. So this is a little confusing for me. It really is. So I'm trying to break it down by sentence here. Because it's not really stating that the broker gets the commission, because it's stating the commission is due at settlement unless the buyer, after the sales contract is accepted, fails to perform or is otherwise in default of the sales contract, or executes a release to which the buyer is not a party, which the broker is not a party of the sales contract, after all contingencies thereunder have been removed. So it is saying that they're entitled to the commission, whether you're going to get it or not is up in the air. And that goes back up to paragraph A, truly. In most cases, it's the seller who pays the commission, but the commission really is coming from the buyer. So that's where that comes in. It's like a net, when your buyer defaults, they're obligated to pay the broker. Just like in Virginia, when you release under a avoidance of contract and a release, if it's at someone's, where they've defaulted, the brokers are still entitled to their commission. So it's the same type of language. Right, Barbara?
Got me.
You're a broker, you're a broker.
100 years ago.
Yeah. All right. So, so the term, this agreement commences when signed and expires at 11:59 p.m. on the expiration date, unless extended in writing or unless earlier terminated as provided, as herein provided. If a contract of sale is entered in by the buyer before the expiration date, which provides for settlement to occur after such date, this contract shall be automatically extended until the settlement has occurred or until the contract to sell is released in writing by the parties. Well, just like in Maryland, I mean, just like in Virginia, you know, when you have an expiration date, I encourage you to calendar yourself on your phone, give yourself a 30-day, 21-day warning, 14-day warning to get an addendum signed to extend your expiration date. So let's say you look at this and you expire on September 15th and you're supposed to close on September 3rd on a property. And you think, oh, it's no big deal because I'm covered. But what about if the offer falls through, okay, for some reason or other, buyer or seller, and it's voided? And you failed then to get an amendment signed to extend your agreement. And then your buyer goes, say, to a new home construction, okay, you could be out of a commission. So same with your listings. Even though it says it expires and you have that grace period, don't take the grace period. Go through and get it signed. Okay, I had a situation a couple years ago in Virginia where that's when we had the cooling off period in the where you could terminate, and you're allowed 3 days or whatever you chose. And my seller, though they weren't doing anything they were supposed to do, they thought the house wasn't selling because of me, and I agreed to release them. And literally, I took it off the market, and I was teaching boot camp that next morning, and my phone would not stop ringing. It was going crazy. So finally, I paused class, looked at all these messages, and it was an agent saying, "Are you sure you're off the market? Because my client wanted to look at the property today." So I sent the client a message quickly. And because of 30 days, I could still talk on her behalf because we were still in that cooling off period, but I did have that 30 days in there, and we got it reactivated, and the property did sell in the seller's time frame on the market, so to speak. But you know, again, you're looking at your timelines and what does your agreement actually say, and abiding by that. Okay, so now under termination, even though this contract, this buyer's agreement is for both Maryland and DC, as it says here, okay, the termination is not the same. In DC, it simply says, this agreement may be terminated prior to the expiration date only by mutual written consent by both parties. So the broker and the buyer have to agree to terminate. So that's the situation where the broker might say, okay, you're not getting along with Ann. I'm going to let Barbara handle your situation and move on with you. I understand you and Ann are not getting along right now. That's okay. Barbara can come in and take over. She's a really sweet lady. She won't argue with you like Ann does.
That sounds like a jerk.
See, they're in class. I get to pick on them. Okay, so remember, DC, both parties have to agree. In Maryland, it says the broker relationship established by this agreement may be terminated unilaterally, which means one way, by either party prior to the expiration date by delivering blank days advance. So this is an agreement, you know, so 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever you choose. I've often put 3 days. I was trained on 3 days because it kind of covers the weekend, you know, when people are out of pocket on the weekend and stuff like that. Nowadays, as we've got phones and emails, and people are more prone to keep an eye on their emails because they come in on their phones. contact is more rapid than it used to be, but sometimes people used to go a day or so before they actually looked at their email if they were not in a business where they were using their email. So that's why the 3 days was a good time frame. In advance notice to the other party. So you as the agent can fire your buyer and vice versa, okay? Now there should be some type of verbal conversation with that buyer before you send them a quit notice. But remember, it's your broker who has to send the notice, not you. Even if the brokerage relationship is terminated under the terms above, the contractual obligation shall remain in full force and effect unless terminated by mutual agreement, written consent of all parties, in addition to the terms of paragraph 4B, the protection period shall survive even if this agreement is terminated early. Okay, so back up to the protection period. So they're really asking you to get an agreement. So here it says the commission shall be paid to the broker if the property is purchased within 30 days after the termination of this agreement. Okay, unless the buyer enters into a new valid agreement, you know. So in this case, it's protecting you as the agent if the buyer fires you, okay? If they haven't signed up to agreement with somebody else and there's something in the works, you still do the commission, okay? Okay, disclaimer and limitations. Okay. Buyer acknowledges that the broker is being retained solely as a real estate agent and has been advised to seek professional advice for legal, tax, appraisals, home inspection, survey, engineering, and other matters. Buyer acknowledges that the broker may represent other buyers and that other potential buyers may consider, make offers on, or purchase properties through broker. Buyer consents to broker's representations of the other buyers before, during, and after the expiration of this agreement. Upon receipt by broker of the ratification contract to purchase property pursuant to the buyer agency agreement, broker shall have no further obligation hereunder to procure any subsequent properties for the buyer. Buyer agrees, there's a book right over there behind you. Buyer agrees that the broker may perform ministerial acts for the seller. A ministerial act is a routine act that does not involve discretion or the exercise of the broker's own judgment. Buyer acknowledges the possibility that the seller or seller's representatives may not treat the existing terms or conditions of the buyer's offer as confidential information. Okay, so when, just like in Virginia, guys, even if you are an accountant, even if you are an attorney, or like myself, I was paralegal East Coast and West Coast, I cannot give legal advice to somebody. I cannot say to my client when they say to me, should I put my house in a trust? I don't know, go talk to an attorney. You know, will that help me with my taxes? I don't know, go talk to a CPA. Okay. Well, you gave me we did a CMA, market analysis on the property. Do you think that's a good appraisal? I'm not an appraiser. I don't know. Okay. Well, your dad's a contractor. What do you think of the house? Can your dad come and look at my house? Nope, he can't. That's up to you to hire the home inspector. So, and where we get in trouble with things like this, honestly, is when we're really working with people that we're really close to. Family members, my sister, when they bought they sold an investment property, bought a property recently, and she was trying to ask me some of these questions, and I said, you are my sister. I cannot answer those questions because I'm also your realtor. If we were talking in general, outside of this offer, as your sister, with my knowledge, I might be able to advise you on some things or point you somewhere. But as your sister, and the fact that I'm also your agent, I cannot do this with you. So it took her a little bit to understand that. But and then I showed her, the language that I don't represent you in any of this, even though I may have had expertise in that field And then same with doing a home inspection. Years ago when my parents bought their house out in Culpeper, Steve represented them and my dad did the home inspection himself. That was before Virginia required you to have a license. He and my brothers did the home inspection because they know what they were looking for. You just can't do that these days if you're going to use it as a contingency. Okay, so just bear in mind things like that to be careful. Okay. General provisions, laws, and regulations. Buyer acknowledges that the broker must comply with federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Buyer understands that as a realtor, broker must also adhere to the code of ethics promulgated by the National Association of Realtors. Because in Virginia, we're required through our association to join our local association, the Virginia and the national, and same with Maryland and DC. There are some areas of the country that agents are not necessarily required to join the National Association of Realtors. Although I think nowadays that's fewer and far between, but years ago that was certainly pretty common. So you were only a realtor when you were part of the National Association of Realtors. Okay, delivery. Delivery or delivered means hand carried, sent by overnight delivery services, sent by wire or electronic medium, which produces a tangible record of transmission, such as a fax. When I see that, I always laugh. Hardly anyone faxes anymore. Email, which includes an attachment with an actual copy of the executed instrument being transmitted, or U.S. postal mailing. In the event of overnight delivery service, delivery will be deemed to have been made on the next business day following the sending, unless earlier receipt is acknowledged in writing. In the event of the U.S. postal mailing, delivery will be deemed to have been made on the third business day following the mailing, unless earlier receipt is acknowledged in writing. Now, I have been in 3 situations where overnight actually meant 2 days because of the area of the country in which it was, okay? So when it came to delivering HOA documents, hard copy, because the person did not have email, we had to make an amendment to the fact that it was 2 days overnight. And we got the receipt from the from UPS or FedEx, but the language here says it's deemed 1 night overnight, but there are parts of the country, and one time it was not even 60 miles outside of Atlanta, but it was considered a 2-day overnight delivery. That was their fastest delivery service, to be there in 2 days. Okay. So notice, this agreement shall be deemed enforceable when it and all addenda and any modification thereto have been signed, initialed, where required by buyer and broker or supervising manager, and delivered to the other party. Now, in Maryland and DC, some of their documents will say supervising manager or the agent can sign it, and our brokerages, no. It's only the brokers who can sign, which right now is Shannon and Steve Gaskins, and Steve is the one who signs Maryland and DC, I believe, and Shannon signs the Virginia for all the offices. Okay, paragraph headings. The paragraph headings in this agreement are for reference and convenience only and do not define or limit the intent, rights, or obligations of the parties. Somewhere along the way, someone has tried to claim that something was misled to them, and that's why they have to put that little sentence in there. Somebody sued somebody. That's why these documents, and this one's pretty short. Some of the other ones are much longer. Definitions. The singular shall include the plural, the singular, and the use of gender shall include the gender, other gender. The term seller shall be optioner or exchanger. The term buyer shall be optionee or exchange. So in Virginia, it's purchaser or buyer, but in Maryland and DC, old language on the books, you might see the word optioner or exchanger, optionee or exchange. But pretty much you're going to see seller and buyer predominantly, okay? Unless there's some, old document that needs to be signed somewhere along the way. Okay, inclusions, agreements, and receipt. This document and the attachments below contain the full and entire agreement between the buyer and the broker and supersede any prior or contemporaneous agreements, if any, whether written or oral between the parties. Each acknowledgement, receipt of the copy of this agreement in accordance with Maryland and the District of Columbia law included in this agreement. So in Maryland, you have to either include consent for dual agency and notification of dual agency within a team. If they apply, if they don't apply, you don't include them. And in DC, you have to do consent for dual and designated representation. Okay. Dual agency, in the event of dual agency, when either the party or broker declines to consent and write into dual agency, either party may terminate this agreement by written notice to the other party. So remember, Maryland does not allow dual agency except within a team. DC allows dual agency, but you have to consent to it. But at any point, if one party decides they don't want it, and I really truly say, don't do it. It's so complicated. I use this in the Virginia boot camp. Let's say you represent a seller and they're listing their property and they say, I want to list it. I'd like to get $880 out of it. You know, I only owe about $200,000 on it, but you know, I think the market looks good. Zillow says it's worth $880, but I'll take, you know, I'd like to get $880. So let's list it for that. And you as an agent, yeah, it could be, but and you're not quite in a seller's market per se. And then the seller says to you off the cuff, says, you know, but if I get, you know, anything above $850, I'll take it. Okay. So you know that going in as the listing agent and you have it on the market. Then all of a sudden you get referred. Someone sends you a referral from your database and you meet them and you send them to the lender and the lender says they qualify for $850. And you set up their search for $850 or below. But what happens? They're driving through the neighborhood they like and they see your sign and they say to you, do you think your seller will take $850 for the property? And you say to them, honestly, I don't know, but let's write an offer. Now you know certainly well he's going to take $850. So you write that offer, but you've never told the buyer that they're going to take $850. Do you think that seller's ever going to believe you, no matter what you've said to them, that you never shared that with your buyer? Okay. Whether you're giving them a variable rate or not, it does not matter. It causes bad blood. The best thing to do in that situation is you refer that buyer to another agent to write the offer and you take the referral. Okay. And then, you know, that way you're keeping your seller happy and you've got that referral source that your seller could be providing you over the years. Okay. So if there's any additional provisions as a buyer that they need to make clear, and what I suggest, if you're someone working with transaction coordinators or assistants on a team, and you have a buyer who has a very specific need, for example, that they only want a condo, or they only want a condo, say, in Rockville, or they only want a condo in Montgomery County, then that might be something you might put there, just so when you're passing off this to someone who's assisting you to set up the MLS, they see that, and then you're not going to offend the client by, you know, sitting them detached in townhouses in Rockville, for example, when they only want a condo. Or if they say 2-car garage is a must, I would write that down. I would write it down so I know for sure, especially when you're getting busy, you have multiple clients, and you think, oh, I'll be easy to remember that. And then you get home and it's like, what did they say was a must? I don't remember. So as much as you can capture and write down for somebody, it's better, especially when they tell you it's important. You need to make note of it's important. So here the buyer is going to sign, or buyers, the broker is going to sign, and then the agent also signs in Maryland and DC. Okay. Then down below, The address for the buyer is written there. We're in Virginia, remember, it's at the beginning. You've got buyer broker. Here it's at the end of the document. So the broker's firm name, the broker's address, and the phone number. Okay. All right, so let's take a 10-minute break. So everyone can take a breather and get a beverage if you want to. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can stop recording for a moment. And then we'll be back at 1:10. Okay, we're recording. Now share my screen. This is Jackie Jordan's network bandwidth is low. Jackie, did you know that? Your bandwidth is low. Anyway, that's what Mike's computer's telling me.
No Earl Grey.
Okay, that's fine.
You are English.
Okay, that's all right. Maybe the next break I'll go grab something. Okay, so now let's go to page 9 in your book, which is the Virginia document. The DC document that accompanies the buyer broker agreement. Okay, so it's consent for dual representation and designated representation in the District of Columbia. Okay, this is not the Maryland document. Remember, Maryland had 2 separate documents. This is the DC document. Otherwise, they use the same buyer's agreement. To be attached to all listing agreements and buyers or tenant brokerage agreements for transactions in the District of Columbia. So you use this on both sides of the deal, okay? So they're explaining to the buyers and sellers what the terminology means. So designated representation occurs when the seller or the landlord has entered into a listing agreement. I'm sorry? Is someone has a question? Okay, I'm going to continue. Buyer and seller tenant enters into a brokerage agreement with a different licensee affiliated with the same firm. Each of the licensees, known as a designated representative, represents fully the interest of his or her individual clients. The supervising broker is a dual representative of both the buyer and the seller and must not disclose information obtained in confidence to the other parties in this transaction. So designated representation means that in Keller Williams Falls Church and Kingstown and Fredericksburg were one big pool of agents, okay? So if someone in that group of agents represents the seller and someone else in that group of agents represents the buyer, then you're both designated representatives, whether you're doing a deal in Maryland, Virginia, or DC, and that has to be disclosed. The buyer and the seller need to understand that the agents work for the same broker, okay? So it's important that they understand that. Now, you're not the same agent, so it's not dual representation for the agency, but the broker themselves, in essence, is a dual agent or a dual broker, okay? And that's important. So your client needs to understand that, because if they say, I don't want dual representation, then you explain to them this is designated. If you don't want this, that means any listing that comes up in our offices, we cannot show you if you're a buyer. And then they say, oh, you're totally committed to your buyer and someone else is totally committed to their seller, and you're not, so to speak, sharing information across the water cooler. You're not divulging secrets, and you shouldn't be doing that. And I can tell you, when I used to sit here in this office on a regular basis, I was always amazed at the conversations I could hear going on around me, people talking about their clients. You got to be very careful what you're saying and where you're saying it, because you never know, as a listing agent in an office, who might be bringing the buyer, okay? So if you're talking to your seller, be very careful where you're talking to them at, especially if it's something that, not that you need to hide anything like a latent defect, but like in terms of their offers and what they're willing to accept. Just be very careful who you're talking, where you're talking when you're talking to your client, okay? So if the seller or landlord has not consented to designated representation, the party may not be shown by any of the licensees affiliated with the brokerage firm that have entered into the representation agreement with the prospective buyer or tenant. If the buyer or tenant does not consent to designated agency, the buyer or tenant may not be shown any properties listed by the other licensees affiliated with the brokerage firm, like I just said, prior to entering into the contract in which the buyer or seller are represented by designated representatives. The relationship of the both designated agency must be disclosed and confirmed in writing. Now, the Virginia contract on the buyers and the listing both, this is in the body of the document, right? It's incorporated in there. You ask them, do you consent or not consent? In DC and Maryland, it's a separate document. And this one's for DC only. Dual representation. Someone's, if you're not asking a question, could you mute yourself, please? Whoever it is.
Absolutely frustrating. That should have been easy. Yeah, that's an easy. Yeah, you guys own Falls Church in Alexandria. You don't own that over there. Here's the letter. What? Yeah. Why do I even sign an FTE?
He's not, okay, he's not in front of his computer. He doesn't realize we can hear him. Yeah. Mute, okay, yeah. Okay. Right, okay. He doesn't realize we can hear him. He's not even on camera, he's away. Okay, dual representation occurs when seller or landlord has entered into a listing agreement with a licensee and the buyer or tenant has entered into a buyer broker agreement with the same licensee. When the parties agree to dual representation, the ability of the licensee and the brokerage firm to represent either party fully and exclusively is limited. As I explained earlier, the confidentiality of all clients shall be maintained. Again, even though in my little example earlier, I made total confidentiality of what my seller said, my buyer just happened to want to be in that same, his low end of the price range. Now, where you were probably going to see more dual representation that's acceptable would be in the tenant landlord situation, because it's easier. You represent a landlord in posting a listing, and more than likely you're going to get people calling you from online websites that are not represented by other agents, and you will represent them, okay? Or you will have them sign non-representation agreements. Okay, so if the seller or landlord does not consent to dual representation, the property may not be shown by the licensee to any prospective buyers or tenants that have entered into a buyer brokerage agreement with the licensee. If the buyer or tenant does not consent to the dual agency, the licensee may not show any prospective listing by the licensee prior to entering into the contract to which the buyer and the seller are representing the dual agency. This relationship must be disclosed, confirmed in writing. Okay. So now it says I or we, so whoever the parties are, consent to designated representation, acknowledging that Keller Williams Realty, whatever, may represent both the buyer and the seller, or landlord and tenant, and the sales associates, and the sales associate. So here you have to put in your name and your license number for DC. Okay? That's part of this agreement. You should have it in your wallet. You should be able to pull it up in your wallet and punch it in, or you just go out to the website and copy and paste it from there. But you need to make sure you have that license number in there, okay? So I or we designate representation. So is it the seller, the landlord, the buyer, or the tenant? So that has to be checked. Then they have the choice if they do not accept designated representation. Again, if someone says we don't accept it, you want to make sure you explain to them the difference between designated and dual. It's very rare. Whenever I see it come up, I always go back to the agent and say, are you sure that that's what they meant? And then go ahead.
Can you quickly go over the difference? And I know you said it, but you do it one more time, designated between dual.
Okay. So in the umbrella of our offices, so we've got Falls Church and normally it's your brokerage. So in most cases, it would be like one brokerage, say Falls Church, Keller Williams Falls Church. But because we're 3 entities under the same broker, we want to make sure we're covered under designation. So if anyone in our office represents a seller that we as a buyer's agent are going to take someone to their home, whether it's Maryland, Virginia, or DC, that's considered designated representation. Because both the listing agent and the buyer's agent work under the same brokerage, okay? So there's always the potential of conflict or secrets being leaked. That's why you have to give notice to that, so that all parties understand that we work under the same umbrella brokerages. It's possible we may have never met each other, okay? That's very possible. But the moment you especially with the 3 offices now, but the moment you are a buyer's agent and you're bringing up a listing, and if I'm just going to go show a property to my buyer that an agent in our office in our brokerages is listing, I have my clients sign the designated agency. I let them know that the agent whose house that is, that they're representing the seller, they're someone within our brokerage, okay? Dual agency means that I as an agent represent the buyer and the seller, okay? Our brokers do not want us to do dual agency. It's just not a good idea. Except sometimes the best case scenario would be in a rental situation, because you often will get tenants coming along who are not represented by an agent, and you're basically doing ministerial acts of them filling out an application and turning over checks. Okay, you're not showing them the property except for the one property that you have listed. Okay, so that's where dual representation could come into play in DC and in Virginia. In Maryland, you're not allowed to do dual representation except within a team. Okay. So then I or we consent to dual representation, acknowledging that the brokerage firm, Keller Williams Realty Falls Church, and the sales associate, Deb Roof, and my sales associate number, may represent both the seller and the buyer as dual representatives for both parties indicated. So if it's in a sale situation, I'm representing the seller and the buyer. If it's in a rental, landlord and tenant. Again, we do not consent to dual representation. So in most cases, you're going to have the first item checked at the top and the bottom one checked at here. So this one and this one, okay? And then your buyer or your seller is going to sign here, okay? Now, let me go to, give me a second to find what page we are on for the Maryland one. I'm not finding my
Is it 32?
32. I did not do my, no, 31 and 32 is the same. I did not do the, I don't think I brought in the dual agency. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I'll download that and we'll just go through it and talk about it. But again, I think I consciously didn't do it because they don't want us to do dual agency. So that was my conscious decision when I was pulling documents, I think, or subconscious decision because we don't use them here. Okay. So now we're going into listings. Does anyone have any questions about buyers? Oh, I'm sorry, before I continue, remember that you always have to have your cyber notice and the affiliated business disclosure for your brokerage. Those two are must that you have to have that goes along with this package. They're the extra addenda that the office requires you to do, okay? So please, and if you've never written an offer at all, Virginia, Maryland, or DC, and you're not sure what those forms are, let me know, and I can send you a copy of them. But each one of our brokerages, you have your own cyber notice and your own affiliated business disclosure. We are affiliated with different businesses like the Universal Title. Some of us are with Highland, some of us are with Movement Mortgage, different, each office has a different business affiliation. Okay, so now listing agreements for, yeah, go ahead.
Dual agency within a team on page 74.
You did, okay, I put it on,
Team one, you don't have the separate one.
okay.
Because Maryland,
It's only within the team, right?
we can't do dual.
Thank you.
But it's on 74.
Okay. Right, okay. So I'll have you guys look at that on your own. Page 74, the notification of dual agency within a team in Maryland, okay? And then, so let's get started on the listings because the balance of these classes over the next 3 weeks will be on the contracts and all the addenda. And Maryland will probably spend at least 3 hours on the addenda alone for Maryland. So let's kind of move through the listing agreement here. So the listing agreement for DC, okay. So improved means there's a structure, unimproved, just like in Virginia, that means it's land. And then again, we have the consent for dual representation designation, which we just went over, but it goes, remember the document said both listings and purchasers have to do that. We are on page 11 right now. Okay. It's the checklist for the DC listings. Okay. Again, if you're someone who's representing a property that's built before 1978, then you have to provide them all the lead-based paint disclosures. Okay. Now here's where we start varying from Virginia. And we have extra documents where Virginia, these things are included within our listing agreement, within our buyer's agreements. So we have inclusions and exclusions. It says it's required. We'll get to that document later. Jurisdictional disclosure. So there's one for DC. You'll see that there's one for Maryland. Years ago, Maryland, Virginia, and DC all shared a regional sales contract. And then we all had our own jurisdictional addendums. We all had our own extra addenda. Virginia kind of got fed up with all the changes. And so we separated out and made ours a little bit smaller than theirs. And so we don't have to have all those extra addenda. It's incorporated into our agreements. But Maryland and DC still share a lot of the same agreements, and then they add their extra addenda in depending on that jurisdiction. So they build onto it. You got the seller's property condition disclosure. required if not exempt. So cases where it's exempt, when it's an estate, when it's a foreclosure, REO type thing, owned by a corporation. Then you got the lead-based paint federal disclosures, lead-based paint DC disclosures. Then if you have condos or co-ops or HOAs, okay. And we're not going to get into the tenancy stuff right now, which is for rentals. And then later on, we'll do the, when we get to contracts next week, we'll go into that. So now let's go to page 14. And we'll start looking at that listing agreement. So just like with the buyer's agreement, right off the bat, what you see is it's from Montgomery County, in this case, Maryland and DC. Okay, like I said from the outset, I chose to do the Montgomery County one. A lot of the information is the same as what you see in Virginia. It's just presented differently. Now, whereas in the buyer's agreement, you don't have the buyer's information and the broker's information on the front page like you do here. It's you memorialize in the end, but a lot of this is very similar in some ways to what you see in Virginia. The property address, the unit number, the subdivision, okay? Because some subdivisions, you want to make sure you capture that and double check, you know, see what the tax record says and double check that, because every now and again you may have a client who thinks they live in a different subdivision than they actually do, because they are one street off and they assume they're part of that subdivision, and in fact they're not. Okay. I ran into that in a situation in Reston about a year ago. The person who was advertising on a particular subdivision was not part of that subdivision, which caused them to be a comp, not to be an effective comp for that property when you're working with an appraiser, because it was dragging down the other price of homes because they were not in the neighborhood that that agent had listed them to be in. Okay. Project, now, you know, in DC and parts of Maryland and stuff, there may be a project name. It's going to be in the tax record. You just replicate it over there. Okay. All this information you really want to take from the tax record for accuracy. I encourage you greatly to make sure you do lots blocked, squares, tax IDs, anything that's specific in the tax record, please put in your listing agreement and please put it in your contracts. Several years ago, before our KW days, we had an agent who was trying to help someone buy a property in Maryland. And I've told the story with the boot camps before, that little strip mall was being converted, and there was, I think, 5 or 6 units, and the owners of that little area hired someone to put cardboard numbers on the outside of each door and said left to right, it's units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it was told to put them on front and back. So what happened was, on the front of the building, they did left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the back of the buildings, they did left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what's the problem with that? Unit 1 and 6 was the same. Okay, what's the problem with that? Everyone parked in the alley. No one went through the front door. So the unit that was written up was on the wrong end. Neither the listing agent or the buyer's agent, who was one of our agents, neither one of them put any of the tax information in that offer. Personally, I believe that the seller and the seller's agent knew exactly what was going on, because they knew what unit the people had gone into, and they allowed the sale to go through. They allowed the tenant to go in and start making repairs to the property. It was a dilapidated property, started cleaning it out. And after it was a good partly way cleaned out, the seller walked in and said, "What are you doing in my property?" They had no legal right to it. It was the wrong unit. Yeah. So that was a fun thing that Steve and I dealt with. Didn't go well. But anyway, so that's why you want to make sure you do have the right tax ID and stuff. And you will find more than likely a lot of agents out there will just blow past and will not fill this information in, like I said earlier.
Was that in DC?
Baltimore. Baltimore. Yep. It was like right after the crash and the revitalization of Baltimore. Okay, so the seller, list all the sellers, and you can use a simple comma. You don't have to use the word and or the ampersand, because online when you're typing this in, it does divide it up by commas. The mailing address is different. So if they're selling a property where they do not live, it's their mailing address that you want here. You need at least one number, home or cell. Most of us are capturing cell phones now. And an email address. And you need an emergency contact. So if the seller can't be reached, Maryland wants the broker to be able to reach out to someone to try to, locate them in the case of emergency. Emergencies happen all the time. People can get sick. People can go in the hospital and have a baby in the middle of a contract and no one can reach them, right? So your broker has to be able to reach your seller, and if they can't reach your seller because you can't reach them, maybe you're incapacitated, your broker needs to have as much information as possible to reach out to your seller when you're not available. And vice versa. Your seller needs to know how to reach your broker in case they can't reach out to you. You're not responding. They've tried for 3 days to reach you, okay? And so the broker, and we have an office code. So I have it memorized, Fredericksburg and Kingstown, but we're KWR 30. That's our office code and our office ID for MLS. KWR 30 is Falls Church. Our office address, our phone numbers. Now here you do put all the information in. Who's the supervising managing broker's name? Steve Gaskins. Who's the listing agent? You are. What's your license number? Okay, because it's asking for the listing agent and their license number here, okay? Unlike in Virginia, they're also memorializing you as the agent right up front here. And then the cell phone number is you and in your email address. And I would not put your email address in here. I would put the broker's email address, frankly, because they have your email address elsewhere and they need to be able to reach the broker. And that's what I've always traditionally done here.
So when we put
Huh?
Maryland, do we put in Steve's email address or?
Well, yes, or you can do KW Falls Church. There's an email address that goes along with each office that goes out to all the staff to capture. When it comes to signatures, then it's S. Lauderstein at KW or S. Gaskins at, yeah. Yeah, S. Gaskins at KW for Maryland and DC. Okay, for all the offices. But like here, KW Falls Church at gmail.com. Now that's probably going to change later on. And then Angela, actually, I don't know. And if someone knows from Kingstown, if Angela is licensed in Maryland and DC, I did not find out before starting this class if she is. But she might be signing there. But as far as I was told, I thought it was Steve for the 3 offices. Okay, so, but I'll double check that and let you guys know next Monday if you should be directing your signings to Angela from Kingstown. Okay, so the purpose, just like with the buyer's agreement, is to establish this agreement between the broker relationship, an agency relationship between the seller and the broker, and a contractual obligation between the seller and the broker in which the broker has the exclusive right to sell, exchange, or convey herein described property, together with all improvements, rights of easements thereunder, thereon, and under the terms and conditions set forth herein. Listing price. The property is offered for sale at the listing price of or such other price as is later agreed upon by the seller in writing. Now, in legal terms, and Shannon is really helping everyone understand this, and Steve and myself, is that when you're going before a judge, you need a start date for an agreement, a termination date for an agreement, you know, what's being sold and how much is being sold for. So you need a listing price in there. Later on, you can amend it. So you might be going to meet with somebody and you're not going to the market for 6 months because they're going to do work, but you want to sign a listing agreement with them so you can work alongside them to get the house ready, to advise them as it may be. So no one else is going to see this agreement except for the broker and you. So it's not going to go online projecting that you're going to sell that house for $880,000, right? So, but the market, between you and the seller, it looks like it might be marketed around 880 based on the improvements they're going to do, based on the conditions of the market. But you're looking at 6 months ahead, okay? So you have a price in there, but it says, or such price as may be later agreed upon in writing by the seller in writing, which means later on, you can change that to go higher or lower depending on the market conditions, right? By the time it goes on the market, there might be comps that pushes it up higher or brings it down lower by 10,000. Then with the listing amendment, you would then change that before it goes on the market, okay? But at least you need something in there. Do not do TBD by an email, because if this went before a judge, like let's say you were going before a judge because things went south and you got fired by the seller and you have termination of expenses or a flat fee, the judge may say, well, this is null and void because you don't have an accurate listing agreement. You don't have a valid listing agreement because there is no price, okay? That's happened recently with somebody. So be careful about that, okay? In the last 3 weeks that's happened, okay? So listing period. This agreement commences when signed and expires at 11:59 p.m. on whatever date. Now, there is no hard, fast rule on how long a listing agreement can be. It's all negotiable. So, like I said, you could do a listing agreement 6 months out. I've had one that was 18 months out because of all the work that was going to happen. You know, they wanted me engaged from the beginning. They wanted to find out things that were going on. They wanted to look for the future, and they wanted to be able to, for me to be able to advise them and talk to them on real estate matters. So it really depends on what that situation is. Could be someone who might be in a, have a rental right now, and they know that when the tenants leave, they want to sell it. So they're engaging you as their agent to help them do things preparatory to selling that. But again, if it's someone who you don't know, you've met at an open house and they don't really know you, they may only want you to do a listing agreement for a month, but then you can extend it if things go well. Okay, so remember, it's an agreed upon thing, but it doesn't mean it can't be changed, okay? All right, so if a sales contract is ratified before this agreement expires, providing for the settlement date beyond the listing period, the terms hereof shall be extended automatically until the final disposition of the sales contract. Again, like I said earlier, if your agreement is expiring during the period before it goes to settlement, get it extended. What better time to extend your agreement with your seller when you're in a contractual situation? Because if the buyer does default or they void on condo documents, you don't have to scramble at the last minute, because MLS will say, oh, your agreement has expired. Boom, you're out of the picture, okay? And what happens that morning at 12:01, those agents that are out there looking for expires have run their reports and they've sent it off to people to start calling your clients. You do not want to be the agent who gets the call from your client saying, I thought you were my agent. Why are these other agents calling me? Okay? Don't be that agent. Okay. Don't be it. Okay. Entry into multiple listing service. So your seller is going to have to initial here. Seller hereby authorizes the property to be entered into active status in Bright MLS on or with one business day of public marketing property, whichever comes first. All listings shall be available for showing immediately upon their entry into the active status in MLS. The public marketing includes but is not limited to displaying of flyers and windows, yard signs, digital marketing or public facing websites, brokerage website displays, including internet data exchanges and virtual office websites, digital communication, marketing, email blasts, multi-brokerage listing, sharing networks, and applications available to the general public. Okay, so just like in Virginia, these are MLS rules. Your sign, your marketing, nothing, your Facebook post can go out on the market more than one business day before it goes active in the MLS. Okay, so be careful about your marketing. Be careful about your signage. Make sure you're working with your sign company to get your signs up according to that installation date. If you have enough advance warning with your client as to when you're going to put it on the market, the sooner you can let your sign post company know. For example, if I know on Saturdays the 15th that I'm going to trigger my listing live on Saturday, and so they can have it, the post in on Friday the 14th, you know, if I knew that last week, I would have made my signpost order, and then in my notes to the company, I would say, please install the sign on the 14th so they can schedule for that day, because they normally have 72 hours. But if I order on Wednesday, it may or may not get there. But what about they install it on Wednesday and I'm not planning to trigger it live until Saturday? And then agents in that neighborhood, you know, they're going to start calling MLS on me. So as much as you know in advance,
You can have the post though, correct? Not your sign on it?
you can't have the post without your sign, correct? Ann's question.
And
Right,
something gets delayed.
right. If, and that's a good point. If the sign post gets there before the date you want it, you need to go by and take the sign down or be one of those agents who ask your client to do it. That's not full service in my opinion. But you know, but just be aware of that. There are a lot of people out there patrolling the streets, especially if it's their neighborhood and they don't want you to be listing in their neighborhood. Okay.
It's a hefty fine.
It is a hefty fine. Yep. Yeah. So just be really careful about that. Okay. The next section here, it says seller authorizes the use of coming soon status in Bright MLS prior to property becoming active and Bright in accordance with the MLS rules and policies. Seller and listing broker understand that the property cannot be shown while coming soon status at Bright. The listing may remain on coming soon for up to 21 days. So again, same thing rule applies. You're going into coming soon. The sign can go up one day ahead and you can start marketing it according to Bright. I don't know why it doesn't say it in here. It does on the Virginia side. But it's the same rules apply to the sign going up, the coming soon sign, only one day before you make it coming soon in Bright. Always understand that on that 21st day at midnight, Bright triggers it active whether you want it to be or not. At that point, if your sellers are not ready, you have to then take it off on temporary status, but your days in the market will start counting. So as you're working with your sellers, be careful about those statuses with coming soon, especially if they're doing work in the house and they're using third-party vendors. I would err on the side of caution, you know, and not put it in on coming soon if you think it might be more than the 21 days, okay? And give it an extra week or so. Because then you're going to just start counting days. You can't stop those days to count once it goes on temporary status. Okay. Seller does not authorize the broker to enter into the MLS. Okay. If seller does not authorize the broker to enter property in the Bright MLS, broker shall instead market property as an office exclusive listing. Office exclusive listing means any listing seller has prohibited broker from public marketing. For each office exclusive listing, broker shall have seller sign and deliver concurrently with this agreement a waiver of broker cooperation form or other acceptable certification that the seller does not authorize the broker to publicly market the listing via Bright MLS or otherwise. Broker shall submit such waiver or other certification to Bright within 3 business days of the execution of this agreement. If seller does not authorize the broker to enter property into MLS, seller acknowledges that by electing not to enter the property into the MLS, real estate licensees from other companies and their buyer clients who have access to Bright MLS may not be aware of the seller's property is for sale and the terms and conditions under which the seller is marketing the property. Seller's property will not be included in Bright downloads to various real estate internet sites and are not used by the public to search for property listings. And any reduction in the exposure of the property may negatively impact the seller's sales price. So this paragraph, in my opinion, is here primarily to make sure when someone's trying to cheat the system that their seller is the ones that have to sign the waiver and clearly understand that they're saying, I don't want my property in Bright. There might be some situations where someone doesn't want it, okay? And they only want you to market exclusively yourself to your office or what have you. I can't imagine what that would be, but there could be. But they're forcing the seller to sign these waivers and upload them, and they have to turn those waivers into Bright, okay? All right, that they don't want it marketed. So brokerage fee. Seller agrees to pay the broker blank % of the sales price or, and it says strike one. Sometimes it's hard to strike one, you know? So you can put X's in there, depending on what system you're using, or 0, but most of us usually do percentages, okay? An additional fee in the amount of, again, this is the flat commission fee. If you're gonna do it, you do it. If not, put in 0 there, or NA. The amount of the broker's fee is stated in this contract and is not prescribed by law or established by any membership organization with which the broker is affiliated. Seller acknowledges that the broker's fee shall be earned and payable in the event that, okay. Well, why does it come up and tell me I can stop it? Sorry. Okay, seller enters into the sales contract during the listing period with any buyer procured by seller, listing broker, or his sales associates, or other brokers or their sales associates, or any other buyer, provided the buyer performs and settles on the contract. Okay, so it says seller acknowledges that the broker's fee shall be earned and paid, right? So if the seller enters into a contract, someone's brought the buyer, they have to pay. Further, such broker's fee shall be paid if the property is sold, exchanged, conveyed, or otherwise transferred within blank days, so say 30 days, of the expiration of the listing period or termination of this agreement, the protection period, to anyone to whom the property has been shown by broker or anyone else, including the seller, during the listing period, unless a valid listing agreement is entered into during the term of said protection period with another licensed real estate broker. So if your seller fires you, and someone who saw the property before you were fired then presents an offer and they have not engaged another listing agent at that time, you are due the compensation, okay? This covers you for that holdover period of 30 days. But more than likely, if a seller fires you for whatever reason, you guys terminate, and they want their house on the market, they're going to go seek another agent to represent them. But they may not in that first 24, 36, 48 hours. And someone does come who saw the property while you listed it, you should be entitled to the compensation unless they have a valid agreement, okay? So just like in my situation in Fairfax a couple of years ago, that's what happened. She hadn't engaged anybody else yet, and that very next day, someone presented an offer. I was covered under my 30-day period, and I was also covered under a 3-day termination period. But both of those covered me because the person brought an offer, and I was able to receive the commission. So the authority to cooperate with and compensate other brokers. Seller authorizes the broker to cooperate with other brokerages as sub-agents of the broker and or as broker retained by prospective buyers to represent buyer's interest, buyer's agents. So that's what we really use now, are buyer's agents, not sub-agents. We're buyer's agents, old language. Broker shall pay to sub-agent broker who has earned and is entitled to share in the broker's fee blank % of the sales price. Broker shall pay to any buyer's agent broker who has earned and entitled to share the broker's fee blank % of sales price. So if you're not using sub-agencies in your market, then it would be 0 to the sub-agent, and then it would be whatever percentage you're sharing with the buyer's agent, okay? So if you had a 6% listing above, so you're going to have 6% up here, okay? And then you're going to share 3% here. Now, not too long ago, I was reviewing a document that had been signed by the seller, and the agent had put 3% here, and they had put 3% here. And I called the agent up and I said, oh, you're doing this for free? Is this someone you know? And they're like, no, I'm getting 3%. I'm like, oh, no, you're not. Because they're giving you 3% and you're giving away 3%. So make sure it's the total amount of the commission here and what you're giving to the buyer's agent goes here, okay? So that agent was able to go back to their seller and explain their typo and got it fixed.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can you define sub-agent?
not really.
Everybody can ask, right? If somebody was-
We can read the definition of sub-agent. Let's do that. It's one of those mysteries. I've never, you know, if someone else can define it, because to me,
I always felt like it was somebody who didn't have an agreement, but they almost like a limited agent, but with nothing signed.
right. Well, because in old language, within the office, you didn't have the buyer's agency agreements. But now because they're required, that's why I don't even think. So a sub-agent is a person appointed by an agent to perform some duty or the whole of the business relating to the agency. Sub-agents may be considered in a two points of view with regards to their rights and duties or obligations toward their immediate employers.
So I would just not ever use that. If we assigned something like to Christine, or
Right.
something, then we would work that out, you know, as
Right.
somebody on our team, not as a sub-agent.
Right, so Ann's asking, like with sub-agencies, even on a team, you as a operating a team, you're paying a percentage to your agent, but you still have a buyer's agency agreement. So when you go into the commission aspect on the MLS, you're getting the commission based on a buyer's agency, you know? So before, you used to have in Virginia, for example, it would say buyer's agency, sub-agency, and non-representation. Well, Virginia's actually taken out the sub-agency altogether, so it's not even there. So it's buyer's agency or non-represented, and non-represent is someone who comes in without an agent He comes into the open house and says, I want to buy this property. You write the offer. I'm going to pay you $800,000. And oh, by the way, I want the commission that you're going to give the agent. So if you had 3% to a non-agent representative, you would have to then give them that money. You don't see that much these days. But years ago, that was pretty common. I knew people that would hire agents that were investors to search the MLS for non-agent compensation properties, and then they would go make a deal, and sometimes they would just have it deducted off the sales price. But that was their investment. The way they were doing that, they would pay a little small fee for someone to do the research for them. So I've known someone who 15, 20 years ago who bought several properties like that because agents were doing it. They didn't know why they were doing it. They didn't know why they were filling this out. 3% to buyer's agent, 3% to the sub agent, 3% to the non-compensation, So it's one of those, that's part of reading. And at one particular time, the agent was really angry and the broker had to explain to them, you're giving the money away, and their seller was angry because the other side wasn't represented, right? But that's what they did. Okay, so authority to cooperate. Okay, we already did that. Payment of broker's fees. Payment of broker's fees is due at settlement unless seller, after contract acceptance, fails to perform or is otherwise in default of the sales contract, or executes a release of the sales contract in which the broker is not a party. In such case, the broker's entire fee is due no later than the original date of settlement. So if the seller defaults, okay, and it's $1 million deal and you get 3%, 30 grand, and they default, the seller defaults in some way and the broker's not a party to it, this is saying that the broker's entitled by the settlement date to receive that compensation. Now, more than likely they're going to have to sue for it, but it is what it says, right? Because you're doing your work, you're performing your duties at no fault of your own as an agent, the seller has defaulted. Forfeit of deposit. If the earnest money deposit is forfeited, or if there is an an award of damages by a court or a compromise agreement between the seller and the purchaser, the broker may accept, and the seller agrees to pay the broker 1/2 the deposit in lieu of the broker's fees, provided broker's share of any forfeited deposit will not exceed the amount which would have been otherwise been due at settlement. So it's very rare that you're ever going to have in most cases, you don't normally have an EMD that gets paid more than, but you could. Someone might put down a $50,000 EMD on $1 million property, so that is more. But if you split it, then you're getting $25,000, which is less than the $30,000. So you should be able to keep that. So it says may keep it, seller may agree to give it to them, but more than likely, if a buyer defaults, it's going to go back on the market and you're going to get your compensation from the new offer. But it is built in there. It's the same in Virginia. It may and can, okay? It doesn't mean it's a must. Default by buyer. If seller enters into a contract with the buyer during the original listing period and the buyer subsequently defaults, then the original listing period is extended by the number of days the property was under contract. So that's a little bit different for us. So if the property's been under contract for 15 days and the buyer defaults in Maryland and DC, or in this case DC, in Maryland, is Maryland, Montgomery County and DC, it's saying that your agreement extends that 15 days, okay? Automatically extends 15 days. So again, that should cover you during an expiration period. But again, keep track of your expiration periods and just get your amendments taken care of. Attorney fees. If broker prevails in any action brought to obtain payment of the broker's fees, broker shall also be entitled to recover in such action broker's reasonable attorney fees and court costs. Right. And Virginia goes on to explain this in great detail, but court costs can mean expert witnesses or anything. So basically with attorney fees, when there's a conflict, you all should know that a prevailing party is the winner when the judge decides that someone else has done wrong. So the party doing the wrong has to pay the prevailing party who was not culpable in anything that went wrong. So agency, Maryland and DC have each adopted specific laws governing the disclosure of agency relationships and dual agency, i.e. the situation where the listing and selling agencies are associated with the same broker. We went over all that paperwork earlier. The seller hereby consents for broker's non-assigned agent who holds their home open to later represent a buyer in purchasing seller's property or another property. All applicable jurisdictional agency disclosures forms have been made available to the seller who acknowledges receipt of their check below. So seller hereby gives consent for broker's non-assigned agent who holds their open house, holds their home open to later represent a buyer in purchasing the property or another property. Because remember, this is designated representation, not dual. Okay, so Ann has a property that she has listed. Rebecca's going to hold the open house, and eventually someone that Rebecca met at the open house or that's from her database then writes an offer on Ann's property. They've done the designated representation sheet. Okay, but the seller's acknowledging that it could happen. Okay. Just because Rebecca held the house open doesn't mean that Ann has disclosed to Rebecca everything that's confidential with the seller. And you don't do that. When an agent is holding an open house open for you and you're not part of the same team, you don't say to that agent, oh, by the way, he'll take $850. You know, we're listening for $880, but he'll take $850. No, you don't say that at all. That's strictly between you and your client, and the broker is the only one who sees that. Okay. I know in a conversation recently it came up about where we're doing, the offices are having the transaction coordinators and stuff come up. I can tell you, having done transaction coordination for years for agents, and again, it's your personality, your own business. I have never, ever, ever said to one agent or the other, oh, by the way, do you know? You know, I've done both deals and the agents may or may not know I'm doing both deals. I'm writing the offer to someone who I've written the listing or the contract for. And all I'm doing was following what an agent asks me to do. Now, I don't do that anymore, but I used to. So if a buyer's agent tells me this is how much we want to offer, they give me the specifics of the details, and then I take what's online and fill in the difference. And then, and I've written the listing agreement or I've put in MLS. Even though I know what's written on that agreement, I would never, ever breach that confidentiality because now I'm an agent, but it's under the laws of ethics too. I don't want to lose my job, nor do I want to be fined, okay? And now I have told agents in the past, just so you know, that I am doing both sides. They wouldn't otherwise know that I was doing it unless they knew that I did work for that agent. But I've always let someone know before I start. Okay, so then here is where our division comes. We're using the same listing agreement, but now it says in Maryland, you have 2 documents, and in DC, you have that document, which we've already gone over. We're not going to do that again. Authorizations, sign. Seller authorizes broker to install a for sale sign on the property in accordance with the applicable zoning ordinances and community association regulations. I encourage you, I implore you, when you are in an HOA and you are working in a condo, whether it's a condo that's townhouses, make sure you have spoken to those entities themselves, not necessarily your seller, and find out what the rules are for signs. Several agents recently have lost signs because they did not do that. They just had signs installed in properties, like in Fairlington, for example. It's a condo association. They look like little townhouses. There's grass, there's yards and stuff, but it doesn't mean you can have a signpost there. Heritage Hunt, they don't like you to have signposts that are traditional realtor signposts. They want you to use their own little signage and stuff. They're specific about their signage. So you as a listing agent who is receiving the money, you need to follow through. Don't depend on your client, because they may notice that there's a sign there, but they may not notice that there's a size restriction or a color restriction, okay? So be careful about that. Key and lockbox. The seller authorizes broker to allow key entry, showings, installation of lock boxes or a key box like a combo box, and the delivery of door access keys for use of the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, GCAR, members and members of the current Realtor Association signatory to electronic key box service agreement, okay, to access the property and to accompany prospective buyers, inspectors, appraisers, exterminators, and other parties necessary for showings and inspecting the property. Affiliated or non-affiliated members, okay, that's not people that are not affiliated with GCAR, may have access for their business purposes if permission is limited. Access showing code is granted below. Okay, so someone who's not affiliated from GCAR may need to get an access code. The seller is giving them an access code to get into the property to do work. Now, I encourage you to be careful about using combination boxes during a listing period, because there's no tracing back who went into the property. That's why we have lock boxes that have the reports that can come out. Because when you're given a combination box to an agent, you're putting the onus on that agent to be an honest agent who's not going to just give it to their client to go in on their own. Okay, so be very careful. Be very, very careful. Where I might use a combination box would be after it's ratified and it's in a neighborhood where agents tend to drop by without calling. I had a client a couple years ago, that's what happened to him a lot. So we put a combination box on, and I told the listing agent what the combination was, the buyer's agent. So when they went through for their home inspections and stuff, that way the seller was not bothered by unwanted looky-loos coming into their property, okay, because they had access.
Can't you just add a column on code here and block?
Yes. A couple years ago, it wasn't as easy. It wasn't, and people were giving codes, and until someone would go and update their card, you never knew who it was. So at the end of my listing in Chantilly, for example, I probably had, I think, 35 actual people ask me, but over 75 actually got entry into the house. Because they were agents who didn't do a lot of business, so they weren't updating their cards regularly. And they were getting one-day codes, letting people in on their own. And they were standing at the door and getting a code to get in, calling in. And my client worked weird hours. And so what happened was he would tell me, I'm going to go home and sleep for 2 or 3 hours. And people were supposed to contact me to get access. And I would say, no, showing time, no, not till after 4 or whatever. And people came in on him several times that never contacted me at all. Yeah. So, it happens. And I was at a house waiting for the agent to show up for a final walkthrough, and her client walked up and looked at me and says, "Who are you?" I'm like, "I'm the listing agent." "Oh, well, my agent's giving me the number to get in." I'm like, "Oh, no, no, she's not. You need to call your agent. Your agent needs to be here for this final walkthrough." See, I suspected that all along with what was going on. So that's why I was there. Okay. So limited access showing codes. Seller shall, so initials, authorizes or does not authorize use of a one-day showing code. It is understood by seller that there is a possibility that a person may use the access code in an unauthorized manner, which people do. Therefore, caution should be used with these codes, as such codes will allow certain individuals to access a property without an electronic record to their identity. The seller recognizes that it is often desirable and advantageous to seller and may expedite the sale of their property to have such access available. I think you always want to know who's going to be in your property, right? So like Rebecca was saying, use your time blockage and everything on your smart, your Central Lock Smart now. That's so much nicer than it used to be. The property is under lease during the listing period. Seller will furnish broker with a written authorization signed by all lessees authorizing the use of a lockbox and or keys. So if you represent a seller who's also a landlord and they're selling their property that has current tenants, no matter what jurisdiction you're in, the tenant has to be brought on board. The tenant has a lease that says X amount of days, depending on the jurisdiction and the timing and how they're being, why it's being relisted or why it's been listed for sale. So many days to allow the property to be shown, and they have to agree to it. But if you have a seller who may work nights and they sleep in the morning till noon or 1 o'clock, then the tenant, then you as a listing agent need to know that. So showings can't happen till after, say, 2 p.m. Okay? Or a client who might be running a daycare and you can't show until after 3 p.m. in the afternoon, or only on Saturdays. So, different things online. And as agents, you're supposed to abide by that. Newborn, if it's an agent to agent note, it says newborn baby in the house, please don't show between 11 and 1. Baby's nap time. Respect that. Just respect it. Okay? So there should be no issue with that. Private insurance. Sellers advised to.
I have a question on that one.
Yeah.
In Virginia, you don't have to have a written authorization that's signed to you. Like this says you need a written authorization signed by all lessees, but you don't have that clause in Virginia.
No, Virginia doesn't require a written authorization. It just says you need to contact them.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Well, what happens in any jurisdiction, the landlord, the agent, and the tenant should have some type of a meeting. Okay.
No.
You as an agent should meet the tenant. Well, first of all, you want to see the property, right? How bad is it? No,
Well, so I've done this before, and we sat down and I met with the tenant and came to terms, but then they changed their minds on the terms, and they kept changing their minds, but they were obviously living in it, and we ended up being off the market until they moved out, but I was just wondering, like, if you had it all written down, does that matter? And it might go to Virginia out there, so.
Well, in Virginia, for example, so in Maryland's saying a written agreement. So in Virginia, it would be the landlord and tenant who could do an amendment to their lease, and just say, this is what I'm going to do. We had an agent in our office here, and I talk about this in Virginia boot camp, Virginia deal, who had a property that had been leased for, their client had been leasing this property for many years, and the rental was $4,500 a month. So it was a nice property. But the people inside the property were less than clean. And it was on the market to be sold, after the crash and stuff. And the landlord was frankly tired of dealing with tenants not taking care of her property. So she decided she wanted to sell it. But the tenants that were in the property were less than clean. And you're walking into a place that's, being sold for the $800,000. You don't expect, all this trash and dirty dishes in the sink all the time and dirty diapers in the bathroom. So it was becoming an issue with people seeing the house. They were backing out and getting comments. So the landlord actually talked to the tenant, reduced the tenant's their rent with the proviso that they hired a cleaning company or kept it clean themselves. And then anytime the listing agent or anyone else walked in and it wasn't done, then that was voided and they owed the money. So they had a written agreement to do that. And then the property sold pretty quickly after that because people weren't afraid to. And I went there once to show a buyer, and you walked in, and I'm very sensitive nose, and you walked into a dirty diaper smell, So So there's things that a landlord and tenant can do. When you have a tenant that's sitting in a property that does not want to leave, oftentimes they will just do subtle things like that, you know. Yeah, they don't leave the property. And I always tell my clients, no matter what we do, the moment we unlock the door and open the door, if you say, I don't want to see anymore, we just send a message, we just call the agent right away and say, we're canceling our viewing. If anything strikes you about the home is walking up. My daughter reminded me last night, we went to a place, there was tons of bees outside. You know, we were just trying to get into the door. And we finally got in the door with a client, and there were just thousands of dead bees all over inside this house, you know. And we're like, okay, we've had enough, you know, and we left, you know, but, and it had been, you know, rented by tenants who had abandoned it. So I think that you know, in that case, the sellers probably lived out of the area and the agent was just got a sign in the yard, wasn't doing anything, you know, so anyway, I digress. Private insurance. Seller is advised to take all precautions for safekeeping of valuables and to maintain appropriate insurance through the seller's own insurance company. Okay. You're not responsible as agents. Remember, liability. Seller agrees that he, his, heirs, assigns shall identify, save, and hold harmless said broker, his agents, and his affiliated brokers, salespersons, cooperating brokers, sub-agents, affiliated members with keys, and the lockbox access, and all individuals who have used through one-day access code and GCAR Inc. from any and all claims, loss, or liability arising from the use of said keys, lockboxes, including broker's negligence, breach of contract, or any wrongdoing exclusive of gross negligence or willful misconduct. Seller assumes all risk of any loss, damage, or injury except those caused by gross negligence or willful misconduct of any party. So if someone comes in and hurts themselves in the house, right, you as a broker, you're not responsible for it. I had a situation where a client slipped down some steps. Fortunately, they weren't injured badly because of the booties. Hardwood, you know. So it's like, okay, you know, would I walk into a house that's got hardwoods right now and we're wanting us to put booties on because of COVID? It's like, you know, yeah, be careful, you know. And so it's kind of a tricky situation right there when your client says, I don't feel safe doing that, you know. I don't feel safe walking on steps with those things on either. But you know, again, you can't sue the seller because you fall down their steps, okay? You can try, but I mean, you can sue the seller, but you can't sue your broker. Yeah, you can. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, the seller's taking all the risk. I misspoke. Thank you. But your broker, it's not your broker's fault, okay? And nor is it the agent's fault, the listing agent who tells you you have to put the booties on because of COVID, okay? And frankly, I would rather have the booties than go barefooted. Like you know, I was with a client once and they wanted us to take our shoes off and the carpet was filthy. And I said, I'm not taking my shoes off. I don't care what the sign says. I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to make my clients do it either, you know. And that was pre-COVID though. Okay, marketing and virtual office websites. Wow. Okay, internet marketing options. Certain features may be displayed on the websites of multiple listing services other than MLS. This is the opportunity to really educate your clients on those other marketing sites out there and how they're not accurate, okay? So, and make sure you read through this with them and let them choose, but advise them as well. So seller says yes or no. Seller authorizes the listed property to be displayed on the internet. If seller has selected no for the option, a consumer who conducts searches for listings on the internet will not see information about the listed property in the response to their search. So you're making sure that the seller, if they say no, so if they say yes, they're going to initial up here. If they say no, then they have to initial down here as well. They have to understand that and agree to the fact that if it's not on the internet, people will not be able to see it. If no was selected for option 1, skip options 2 to 4. If yes was selected, then go for option 1, then you must do options 2 to 4. Okay? People get this wrong often. Seller authorizes the listing address, including house number, unit number, and street name, to be displayed on the internet. If seller selects no for this option, a consumer who conducts searches for listings on the internet will not see this particular information about the listed property in response to their search. So they say no on 2, they have to initial down here. Now, every now, you don't see it much anymore, but years ago, people did not want their house number listed. So it's just the zip code, and it's only through the agent that an agent that you're working with can actually find the address of the home. So people who were high profile often would choose that option because they didn't want just anybody coming to look at their home. They wanted them to have an agent. They wanted to make sure the people were vetted or whatever. Okay. 3, seller authorizes the display of automated estimates, as we know as Zestimates, of the market value of the property, or a hyperlink to such estimates on the MLS participating websites. So that's not Bright, it's going out to, Zillow and all the other websites.
How do you
I say no here.
know doesn't Zillow and Redfin do it anyway? How can you stop Zillow and Redfin?
Well, it's, and the MLS rules say you can't stop them, but if you say no and your seller wants to go after them, then they can say that they've said no here. You've replicated in the MLS to say no, and the seller chooses to go after Zillow for misrepresenting them, that's up to the seller. Okay. Seller authorizes display of unedited comments or reviews of the property. Again, no here, generally speaking. And then if Redfin or some other site makes comments about your client's property. And this is where you educate your clients too, that other companies are going to link off of the MLS and off of KW. They're going to link, in several days, it's going to start popping up on other sites. And you might see it come up with someone else's face other than your own as their agent. And just say that, that's the agent from that company who's sharing our listing. We don't think it's right, but most people think that's the listing agent. The general public believes that's the listing agent. Like I tell my client, if you go down far enough down the page, you're going to see who it's listed by, and my name will be there. But you're going to find all these other agents who's paid to pop themselves up higher. Redfin pays a lot of money to be top on the searches. So almost every property you look up, Redfin is usually one of the top listings. So what you want to do is get your friends, neighbors, and family always click on your KW listing to kind of get it above the Redfin. But it takes a lot of effort to do that. Okay. Well, it's 2:30. We'll just plow on and not take another break. All right, and then we'll finish up here in a little bit. Let's see, what page are we on? Okay, okay. During the terms of this agreement, seller may, by written request to broker, authorize broker to enable or disable use of either of the features or described above. Broker agrees to promptly transmit the request to the Bright MLS. And by the way, if your client chooses, for example, yes, yes, no, no above, please make sure you replicate it in MRIS. Years ago, they used to be written in the same fashion, like this, and now it's 2 and 2. So make sure you read which one you're checking yes and no to. It's just written a little bit differently than it used to be. And I find often that agents just aren't clicking on the right field. Okay, so broker, huh?
Citizenship, birthday thing used to be,
Remember which way it was? And
Yeah.
now I always check the wrong one.
I know.
Yeah.
It is not a foreign person. Now it is a US. I know.
Right, so we just read the language carefully. They were talking about FERPTA, how it's like backwards all of a sudden, it's written differently. So you have to be careful what it says. And oftentimes what's written in our agreements are different than what's online. The verbiage is a little bit different, so you have to really be careful what you're reading. Okay, so broker agrees to promptly transmit the request to the Bright MLS. Broker cannot control if unauthorized or disabled features are displayed by others on the internet. Seller understands and agrees that the public websites determine their own content and use of data, and therefore broker has no control over the public websites and no obligation to remove any of the above content from public websites at any time. You couldn't anyway. Broker is further authorized to and shall market the property through various means, including but not limited to installing a sign, photographing the interior and exterior of the property, and installing a lockbox. Seller authorizes the broker to market the property, including use of address and interior and exterior of the property, seller authorizes the broker to market the property, including use of address, interior, and exterior photographs and media, which may include but not limited to publications at broker's discretion, except as otherwise limited by seller in paragraph 10A, which is the check marks above. A seller acknowledges that the broker is bound by the bylaws, policies, procedures, rules, and regulations governing the Bright MLS and the lockbox system. Seller hereby authorizes the broker to report any contract of sale with sales price and terms of sale to Bright MLS for dissemination in accordance with the rules and regulations. So when you do get an offer, you have to, put in Bright that there's a pending offer or something's under contract, okay? So pictures, you always want to depersonalize and declutter and stuff. So when you're putting pictures out there on the internet, please be careful to make sure that there's nothing in the background of your client's pictures that they may not want seen out. Like I always have my clients get all the stuff off their refrigerator, so the family calendar and stuff like that, get that off the refrigerator during the pictures and stuff like that. I always suggest they put it in a drawer during the listing period, if they can live with it not being up on the refrigerator. Because you don't want people knowing where they're going to be at different times. You just don't want that. It's a safe, in my opinion, it's a safety thing. And another thing to do with your clients when you're listing a property, and some of you may already do this or practice, some of you are newer, but in a kitchen, everyone always seems to have a junk drawer of some sort. You can usually find it pretty quickly. I always suggest that they take a drawer or an area and designate that as the collection for all things that's going to convey, keys and fobs and fireplace keys and manuals, just stuff like that, and just keep that going from day one when they first start listing. And then if they have a drawer that they need, then they have their junk drawer or something and a desk drawer where they can keep their calendar and their personal stuff, and to depersonalize and keep the refrigerators depersonalized as they can, okay? Stainless steel makes it nicer now that it's not so full of stuff. Okay, inclusions and exclusions. Unless otherwise negotiated in the sales contract, the sales price shall include those items of personal property as described in the attached inclusions and exclusions disclosure. It is recommended that this disclosure be left at the property or placed online for prospective buyers. So if your client wants you to display flyers in their home with COVID, a lot of people are not doing that, but the minimum you're putting it online in your documents. You want to do that. We'll get more into that later on how you should be doing your online presentation with your documents. Okay, property condition and disclosure of material facts, legal requirement. Seller acknowledges the broker has informed seller of seller's obligations to provide a property condition disclosure to the prospective buyers as defined in the applicable jurisdictional forms attached herein or hereto. Indemnify. Seller agrees to indemnify, save, and hold broker and his sales associates harmless of all claims, complaints, disputes, litigation, judgments, and attorney's fees arising from any incorrect information supplied by the seller or from the seller's failure to disclose any material facts. So if the seller doesn't disclose something to you properly, lied to you, and you're not aware of it, they're holding you harmless, which means the buyers cannot sue you for something that you misrepresented, okay? Hazardous materials and conditions. There are environmental conditions and hazardous materials that could affect the property and sale. Broker does not have the technical expertise to advise seller of these of their presence. Seller may employ an expert to inspect for same. In the event seller conducts such tests and makes reports available to the broker, seller authorizes the broker to make reports available to prospective buyers. So if your seller says, well, I don't know if there's polybutylene pipes. I have never heard of that term before, because on the questionnaire, it asked them, are there polybutylene pipes? And if the seller does hire someone to come and check out their pipes, then they're giving you the authorization to disclose that. So it could be, no, there's no polybutylene pipes. Here's a report stating such, or there's cast iron pipes, or whatever it is, okay? Amend as applicable. Seller agrees to amend in writing the applicable disclosures if any material changes affect the property occurs during the listing period. So when it was listed, there wasn't a foundational crack, and all of a sudden there becomes one. They have to amend the disclosure, okay? I would get it fixed, but, but they need to amend it, okay? Lead-based paint regulations. A seller who fails to give the required lead-based paint disclosure form, an EPA pamphlet entitled Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, may be liable under the Act for these items, Act for 3 times the amount of the damages, and may be subject to both civil and criminal penalties. Seller and any agent involved in the transaction are required to retain a copy of the completed federal lead-based paint disclosure form for a period of 3 years following the date of settlement. So in Maryland, often we'll make an offer, and then on the counter offer, the Maryland agent will send us back the lead-based paint disclosure, okay? I mean, that whole EPA booklet. Ideally, that should be online in documents. You as a buyer's agent has given it. When it comes back, once the buyer checks off they received it, I remove that from the package because the buyer's acknowledging receipt of it. You don't need those extraneous papers in the package. It's just required that it's been given, and they're putting the onus on the seller to make sure that the buyer has been given the pamphlet. Yes, I give it to my buyer, they sign it. I let the agent know that I've already provided it to the buyer, but I've had agents send it in their counter back. And I just let the agent know, my buyer has acknowledged, as you saw in the offer, that they have received it already, and we're going to remove it from the package. Okay. Renovations, repair and painting of the property in accordance with the lead renovation, repair and repainting rule, RRP, as adopted by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, effective April 22nd, 2010. If the improvements on the property were built before 1978, contractors engaged by seller to renovate, repair, or repaint the property must be certified by the EPA where such work will disturb more than 6 square foot of lead-based paint per room for interior projects, more than 20 square feet of lead-based paint for any exterior project, or include window replacements or demolition covered work. Before and during any covered work project, contractors must comply with all requirements of the RRP. So if there's an older home that's got lead encasement windows and lead-based paint, the contractor has to follow the rules about covering stuff up. And so you just have to go out, they have to go out to that website. You got to make sure that if your client's hiring someone to do it, that they're following the rules to get that done, okay? A seller who personally performs any covered work on the rental property is required to be certified by the EPA prior to performing such covered work. So right here, it's telling you that if you as a seller are going to do work yourself, you have to be certified as well. Okay, no certification is required for a seller who personally performs covered work on a seller's principal residence. Okay, so that's the difference, that you've got your principal residence that you live in and you're going to work on it. But if you have a rental property and you're doing that work, that's where it's saying that you have to, be authorized to do it and know the rules. However, seller has the ultimate responsibility for the safety of the seller's family or children while performing such covered work. And then it gives you the location where to find out all that information, okay? Wood destroying insects. Seller agrees to provide access to the property for an inspection to determine evidence of the infestation of termites and or other wood destroying insects. This inspection is in addition to the pre-settlement inspection and other inspections as agreed upon in the sales contract. The inspection shall include the house, garage, or other outbuildings and any fencing abutting the house as may be required by the sales contract. If infestation or damage exists, then prior to or at settlement, seller agrees at seller's expense to treat infestation and repair damages in accordance with the terms of the contract of sale or lender's requirements. In the event the seller accepts a contract which includes a VA financing, seller agrees to reimburse buyer for all reasonable costs of said inspection. Just like in Virginia, a buyer cannot pay on a VA, on any state, a buyer cannot pay if they have a VA loan to have the inspection done. A buyer can choose who the inspection company is going to be. If they pay for it during the inspection, then the seller is going to reimburse them at settlement, okay? The rule does not mean that the buyer cannot choose the inspection company, okay? Oftentimes people think that the seller gets to choose. The buyer still can choose it, it's just the seller pays for it, whether upfront or at settlement, okay? All right, it is 2:43, we didn't take a break, and let's stop there. Paragraph 16, and we'll pick up next Monday. So what I would like you guys to do for Monday is read through the REA. So on your, let's see. Okay, what page? Okay, it's on page 36 on the checkbox. The REA regulations and easement assessments. I would like you guys to, we're going to go over it, but I want you to just really kind of look at it and get familiar with it if you've not seen it before.
What checkbox is that?
Page 36. It says REA, which is regulations, easements, and assessments. This is one area that I find most agents and their sellers mess up. This is where a large majority of the mistakes are made in the Maryland contract.
So that's in here somewhere?
Yeah, page 36 is the, yeah,
That page is actually on 57.
the REA itself is on 57, yes.
That's what you want us to read.
I want you to read what's on page 57, yes. But what I want you to see on page 36 is that the REA includes 4 things that are not in your documents, okay? So this is where I think most agents get confused, because when you look over to the right, if you're looking at page 36, I'm sorry guys online, let me see if I can get to that page so you know what I'm talking about. It is a lot. And people seem to gloss over it. So here, so see here where it says NA, NA, NA? Okay, now the utility one has a number. So what happens is I find that agents don't provide this information because they think it's not applicable. What's not applicable is that it's not in your forms,
Okay.
okay? You have to go out and get a copy of the current tax record online. You have to get the estimated property taxes online. You have to get the recorded subdivision plat online, okay? And it's, because it says it's required. So when you go out on the Maryland website, then it, and I'll find that website. You go out and you can look up those and download them, okay? And download that information and have it as part of your REA. You can help your client do that. Your client has to fill out the REA themselves. It doesn't even allow you in Zip Forms or Command to fill it in at all. It's blocked because they demand that the inclusion, exclusion, all that has to be filled out by the seller, okay? So you often will see those documents handwritten as opposed to checked. Because the seller has, so just familiarize yourself with some of the language in there and what they're asking for. And then we'll go over it more in depth on next Monday. We'll finish up the listing agreement and then we'll start going through some of that stuff as you're, because it's all part and parcel to the listing agreement. It's the items that your client has to do. So it's extensive. Your listing agreement in Maryland is extensive on the documents you have to gather, and then you have to upload online for prospective buyers to be able to download. Okay. All right. Any questions from you guys online? Anybody still with us? Oh, there you are. A few of you are still there.
Thanks, Deb. That was good.
Any questions, guys?
Thanks, Debbie. I got lots of questions.
All right, well, you guys can email me and then I will see you guys next Monday, same time, but feel free to email me throughout the week if you think of something or if something I said did not make sense.
And do you post the
Thank you, Deb.
audios online?
Yes, we recorded this and then each office should be able to post it to your YouTube channel. So the broker or the staff person, and usually within 24 hours or so, they'll post it, okay? All right.
Thanks, Deb.
Bye, everyone.